Okay, that ended right on cue. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I have this bad habit of talking and I'm on mute. So I guess it's just a sign of our times here. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the 2021 MASFAP and St. Louis Graduates Professional Development Institute on Interpreting Financial Aid Offers, including understanding direct and indirect costs. In honor of Black History Month, we started today's meeting with the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And it's National School Counseling Week. So we wanted to recognize the tremendous impact school counselors have on helping students achieve success. So thank you for all that you do. And we were just saying before we started, we could have played We Are the Champions for you. So thank you for being the champion for students. We're thrilled that you're here. So excited to hear from our presenters today. Some of my favorite financial aid people are here today, so thank you all for being here. And before we jump in, we have a few announcements and information to share. So on this slide is our agenda. If we have new counselors joining us today for this workshop, if it's your first one, thank you, welcome. We work really hard to find content and material and presenters so we can all learn, share, and grow together. As for our agenda, Alex Miller from Stevens College is going to provide FAFSA updates. Charles Mayfield from Northwest Missouri State University is going to give an overview of financial aid offers and direct and indirect costs. Teresa Steinkamp from the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis is going to provide a nonprofit perspective on financial aid offers. And then we're going to have breakout into smaller groups to review financial offers from colleges. And a shout out to Chris from UMSL, James from Harris-Stowe, Kayla from Mizzou, Charles from Northwest Missouri State, Alex from Stevens, Dave from SLU, Courtney from Missouri Southern, and Teresa from the Scholarship Foundation for leading these breakouts. So those are going to be our breakout leaders. And then after that, we're going to have a quick report out and wrap up. So we're going to wrap up no later than 11:30. Housekeeping items. As always, give yourself and others grace and space. We wanted to emphasize that everyone is really dealing with a lot right now. Just this week, we've heard, from people themselves who are sick, others who have close family members who are sick. And keep Laura Winter in your thoughts. She's the executive director of St. Louis Graduates and is usually here, of course, and her father passed away this week. So there's a lot going on. Please take care of yourselves and, the others. Show them love. We've heard, I just heard on the news today, actually this week, in January, that people have hit a record of reporting mental health and stress in this pandemic. So, reminder of our meeting agreements, and we'll place those in the chat. This is a living document and continues to evolve. So feel free to add suggestions and comments to that Google document whenever you link to it. And make sure to remain on mute unless you're presenting, just to keep that background noise to a minimum. And join by video if we can. We love to see your voice, especially in those breakouts. We love to see your face, but if you can't, that's fine too. We're just really happy that you're here. You can use the chat function to ask questions throughout, and Ashley Jumore is going to be monitoring that chat. And you can also use the reaction buttons at the bottom to react to something that is said by a presenter. Remember that chat, even between you and another attendee, isn't actually private and will show up in that chat log. So just a reminder about that. This session is being recorded, and we will post notes, the chat log, and that will all be available sometime next week. And finally, make sure to complete the survey that we'll be sending through email after this, because we really do like to get that feedback and think about what we'll do, what we can do for future workshops. Again, thank you to the counselors that are on the call. We appreciate you. And then a few MASFAP updates. We wanted to mention that MASFAP will continue to collaborate with St. Louis graduates on these financial aid workshops. The workshops are open to counselors and advisors throughout the state and not just the St. Louis area. Last year in 2020, when we opened them up and we went into this virtual environment, we had over 500 counselors attend one of these MASFAP St. Louis graduates workshops. And the pandemic has really allowed us to go virtually and cover the whole state with these. Also, the MASFAP scholarship is not open right now. It's always open in the fall, but we use My Scholarship Central when it is open, and My Scholarship Central provides a free platform for students to connect to the major private scholarship providers across the state. So wanted to mention, shout out to Scholarship Central. And, MASFAP has a new early awareness chair, as Kayla Klein from Mizzou served that role for several years and was recently elected to the MASFAP vice president role. So congrats to Kayla. And then Chris Bowen, I think, is on the call, and he's the incoming MASFAP early awareness chair. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Chris Bowen. As Melissa said, I work at University of Missouri St. Louis. I'm really excited to take on this position and trying to expand this working relationship that we have with STL graduates, and just really looking forward to these presentations that we're going to put on and are here to help you guys out in any way possible.
Great, thanks, Chris. All right, so as far as just a reminder, we have workshops, upcoming workshops this spring. And registration is open for those, and all of the workshops, not just the MASFAP workshops, they're open to all counselors in Missouri. So spread the word. Okay, it is now time for our check-in. So in a moment, you will be invited to join a breakout room. Simply click join, and then you'll have a chance to get to know a few other people that are on the call in a smaller group setting. You'll automatically be brought back to the main room in 5 minutes. So it is going to go quick because there's going to be several people in your room. And what we want you to do is just introduce your name, your role and organization, and if you're a pet person, and if you have a specific pet you like too, you can mention that as well. So we're going to hang in here, and Caitlin Venta is going to stick us in a group. Welcome back, and I'm going to turn it over to Alex Miller, Senior Director of Financial Aid, Graduate, Online, and Transfer Admissions at Stevens College, and she's going to highlight the FAFSA updates you've likely been hearing about. So, Alex?
Thank you so much. So, all right, FAFSA updates. It's really just talking about FAFSA simplification, and it's for 2023. So I know we've been hearing a lot about this, but it's actually happening. So I always say, what? We're doing this. Let's do it. So again, I just want to preface that this is for 23-24. That all the changes we talk about today will go into effect. So a year and 8 months. This new FAFSA will open up. I think some of you guys probably have deer in the headlight look, like we're not even, ready for 21-22 academic year. You can't be talking about 23-24 already, but unfortunately it is that time just to kind of start preparing. So I always say we're working 3 academic years at a time in financial aid, which it's about that time to start gearing up for 23-24. So October 1, 22, that's when this FAFSA will open. So it will be affecting your rising sophomores. So just keep that in mind. Great news, simplification means that it maybe is going to get simpler. Geez, I can't talk today. We're going to see, this is going to allow our students maybe not to feel so stressed out about this application process. So it's roughly going to go from 108 questions to 36. It's roughly because we haven't even seen a draft of it yet. So I'm excited to kind of just look through it and see. It's going to take less time for our students. And it's going to, of course, maybe not seem so much of a barrier for them. They're saying that with this 23-24 FAFSA, we're going to see fewer untaxed income items factored in. The other thing that I'm starting to hear is a lot of this data that was actually keyed entered by the students is now going to be actually pulled in even more with the DRT. You may recall before the DRT was, optional. I don't think they're going to make students use it, but it's going to pull in even more information. So that's kind of exciting for us financial aid administrators, because I can't tell you how many times we have seen, DRT means data retrieval tool. Thank you. I get in my FAFSA financial aid talk sometimes, so you could tell me, what's that mean? Slow me down. Thank you, I appreciate that. So I can't tell you guys how many times we see a student key enter something incorrectly. And so we have to, have them go through more hoops to kind of fix that. So I'm excited about that. Again, this is all very new, just passed in December. So there's still a lot of gray area with a lot of these things that we don't have clarification on yet. Something that I want to just remind everyone, the parent on the FAFSA should be the one, if we're in a divorce separated situation, should be the one giving the student at least 51% of the support. Sometimes the student just assumes it's the parent that they live with should be on the FAFSA. That's sometimes correct, most of the time correct, because most of the time that parent is going to be giving them the more support. But there could be a situation that they live with the parent, but the other parent outside of the household is actually giving them more support. So 51% is always my rule. Some exciting news and changing of language, EFC is going to be gone starting in 23-24. We're now going to move to an SAI, Student Aid Index. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. So I know some of you guys were around when we changed from like FAFSA PIN to EFC, or FSAID. So just changing it every so often. They like to change it up on us. This does mean with these changes that there will be more access to students. Huge win for us in the institutions, but also you guys as you guys are working through those challenges with students in your high schools. All right, so SAI, Students Aid Index. In a meeting this past week with my staff, I actually had it backwards. I was saying SIA, so I'm sure this is going to take some time for all of us to kind of get used to. So you guys may recall EFC, the lowest that you could go was 0. So a 0 EFC meant they were probably full Pell eligible, but now we're actually going to start seeing an SAI could be negative. Negative 1,500 is the lowest it can go. This is going to help students, allow them to be over, basically they could be over awarded on cost of attendance. So again, more access to students. The SAI is also going to determine their eligibility for Title IV, just like the EFC did, but now there's going to be a max and a min Pell Grants award. And so I tried really hard not to get it too deep into the weeds because we are a year and 8 months out of this process. But I think it's good to know because people are starting to hear about this. When will it go into effect and how it's going to affect your students? So SAI will determine Pell as long as they don't already meet the max Pell or the min Pell grant award. And max Pell minus the SAI will equal the Pell amount, just like kind of we did with EFC before. But it'll kind of take into consideration now if they meet a certain criteria, they're automatically a max Pell student. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. If a student doesn't qualify for max Pell automatically, and then if after the equation that they don't meet the minimum Pell, they're actually gonna start looking at, okay, just because their SAI was so high, they don't get any Pell, would they meet the minimum Pell by looking at how many students are, how many parents are in the household, and then their AGI versus the poverty level at that time. So again, more access to students, always a win. All right, so let's look at the Pell changes that are coming down the pipeline. Go ahead and we can advance to the next slide, please. AGI is adjusted gross income. So Pell changes. Max Pell grants, again, I'm not going to read this line by line, but I think it's a great resource for you all to have kind of in your back pocket. So they'll automatically be eligible for Max Pell if they're a non-filer, or they're a child of a deceased veteran or public safety officer. That is a change. The public safety officer is now added to the definition. We're still waiting on some clarity on what is a public safety officer. We're assuming, you know, police officers, those in the line of duty, but I'm looking for more clarification on that. So I assume we'll, you know, still get some information over the next year and 8 months, honestly, as this is all kind of playing out. And as Melissa mentioned, we'll hopefully have our fall in-person workshops. And so hopefully by then we'll have some more clarity on this. There'll also be a Max Pell Grant eligibility if they're low-income students and they meet these definitions. Again, we still have the independent, dependent situation, but I think they break it out a little bit more and kind of, you know, looking at the AGI, the adjusted gross income versus the poverty level. So again, just more access. I can't tell you guys enough that I think all of these changes are awesome for our students. So kudos to Congress for getting a bill passed that would actually take into consideration our students. Pell has been restored for our incarcerated students that didn't have access before. Institutions can opt in or opt out, but they at least have an option now. So that's a great program coming back as well. I linked a resource here for you guys. This will take you to kind of the map of the Pell eligibility. This isn't the pathway the students will see on the FAFSA per se, but this will help you. If you have a student in your office, you can kind of go through that with them and see, okay, this is where you would fall and this is kind of what it would look like. Again, it won't be the actual pathway on the FAFSA. It'll just kind of be a resource for you to use as you're talking through maybe a situation with your student. All right, so next we're going to talk about PJ changes. Again, I am excited about the professional judgment changes that are coming down the line. We talk about this a lot. As you guys may recall from other trainings, PJs are really allowed us as the institution to kind of make calls on a case-to-case basis. Some institutions kind of opted in or out of doing PJs, but now they can't do that at all. We cannot have a policy at the institution level that says we deny all PJs. In the times that we're in, I think this is a movement that all students are really kind of in a situation usually. I can't tell you how many PJs we've done for the new academic year just because of the pandemic. But again, this will just be for 23-24 moving forward, but I think it's a good step in the right direction. Institutions are going to be able to offer unsub loans to students without having a parent on the FAFSA without a PJ. So one less hoop they have to jump through. If we have documentation that says support has ended or the parent has just refused to fill out the FAFSA, we'll automatically be able to offer that unsub. Again, less barriers, less hoops to jump through. Not sure what that documentation will look like yet. That's something that we will work through and kind of update our own policies. I'm assuming some of the institutions may require, something on letterhead. Some may require something else, but another just great win for the student. We are now going to be able to reduce the income earned from work if the student or parent is unemployed. Again, this is for 23-24, so not quite yet, but it's one last hoop that they would have to jump through with a ton of documentation. And this will actually allow us to do this even if the parent isn't or the student isn't on unemployment yet. Maybe they just submitted their application and they've submitted it, but they haven't actually started receiving. That's okay. We can go ahead and take the submission of the document as documentation. Great step in the right direction of removing some of those barriers. The biggest win for me on this whole thing was the dependency overrides. We talk about this every year, I feel like, and it's kind of like beating a dead horse, but it's huge when you guys have students coming out of high school. Their dependency overrides, they're supposed to be independent students, but they have to continue to prove themselves year after year or prove that their situation is the same. Now we can assume that it is the same from the year past and just move forward, unless the student notifies that the circumstance has changed or we have conflicting information. That really isn't any different. If I knew a student had conflicting information, I would have to verify that now, of course, but they won't have to prove it and collect documentation and prove it year after year. I have had a question come up about this, about McKinney-Vento and what's that look like. Still not a lot of clarification if they come in under McKinney-Vento the first year and they're an independent student, if that will stand, or if it's, you know, sophomore level or the second year with us at the institution, they would have to, you know, go through the dependency override and then we can move forward from there. So still a little muddy there, but I think we're moving in the right direction again. So I tried to keep this as high level as possible without getting too much into the weeds, but I'm going to go ahead and stop there and see if we have any questions.
Yes, there was a question about the 51% of support for a student. Just what does that include? So like, would it assume food, clothing, shelter, medical, but does it also go into extracurriculars, camps, those types of expenses?
I would say it's overall. So it's everything that the student, you know, the support is really, you know, day-to-day living expenses. So, you know, everything. It includes insurance, I would say, housing, food, extra, you know, curricular, I think you said activities. So yes, I would say overall.
Okay. Thank you, Alex, for that update. And next, we're going to turn it to Charles Mayfield, otherwise known as Buddy, the Director of Financial Aid at Northwest Missouri State University, for a session on what you and your students need to know about interpreting financial aid offers, which is very timely because as a mother of a senior, we're starting to get these come in, and it can be confusing, even for experts. So turn it over to Buddy.
Thanks, Melissa, and good morning, everybody. Want to share some info with you, and hopefully the goal of this session and then the next activity as part of this morning is to give you some info now so that when you look at some sample aid offers here in just a few minutes, you'll have learned some things and understand them, and you'll be able to give feedback on what you like and what's confusing and what schools can do to make them more understandable for students. So they look very different. You'll see a handful of examples of that today. And we know that it can be a challenge. And so institutions want to try to do as best we can to make that as understandable as we can make it. I'll use Northwest. I work at Northwest Missouri State University. I'll use them as an example a little bit, but I'll try to avoid that to some degree as well. We try to tweak our aid offer every year. We learn some things and we try to make some improvements and we try to make some updates. So it's sort of an ever-changing kind of thing, and we want to continue to make it better. So I'll list some common language. You'll hear COA. That's the cost of attendance. That's what we think of as the total cost for a student to be enrolled, typically for a 9-month period. You think if you think about a traditional fall spring academic year, how much will it cost that student to be a student at that institution for 9 months? Some of those costs are paid to the school and some of them are not. And then we get into the difference between direct cost and indirect cost. A direct cost, or you may also hear it referred to as a billable cost. That's something that the university is going to charge the student, and they're going to pay the university for that expense. There's a lot of confusion, and especially about room and board. So we kind of highlighted that one. Room and board, housing and meals are going to be an expense, whether the student lives on campus or off campus. And so in financial aid world, you can get financial aid to pay for housing and meals, whether you live at home or you live on your own or you live on campus in campus housing. So that could be a direct expense if the university is charging you for it. It'd be an indirect expense if the university is not charging you for it. So when you talk about financial aid cost and you talk about paying your bill to the university, the big takeaway here is those are not always one and the same. They're typically not one and the same. So there's a separation there, and we try to help students understand that. So some other common language kinds of things in financial aid. Alex talked about the EFC being the expected family contribution. We've been explaining that as an index for years. It's an index that we use to determine how much financial aid you receive. If a school asked a student to pay that particular amount, it's probably a coincidence. So it's not how much the school is asking the family to pay, but it's a measure of their ability to pay. So we've been describing it that way for a long time, and now the terminology is actually going to change to match how we've been using it. And so that'll be a good thing here in a couple of years. The need that a student would have, I'll jump to that. Talk about the total financial aid cost, and then you subtract how much we think the family should be able to pay. That's how much financial need the student is going to have. And we'll use that to award financial aid funds that require financial need. Sometimes a financial aid award might be merit-based, and it's just based on academic credentials. And sometimes it would be need-based, and it's only based on a family's financial need. So if it's need-based, we use that EFC to determine whether they have the need for that particular award or not. And then as far as categories of aid, we break those out into what we call gift aid and self-help aid. Gift aid is the good kind. It's scholarships and grants. That language gets used interchangeable a lot. I think what you'll find as far as trend lines go, it's not going to be 100% true. For the most part, scholarships are merit-based and grants are need-based. That's a trend, but like I said, not in every single scenario would that be true. And then in self-help aid, you're talking about loans and student employment. Those are things where a student has to do something in exchange for that money. In student employment, they're working in exchange for that money. For a loan, they're repaying in exchange for that money. So there's some action or requirement they have to take to get that beyond just the gift aid concept. I've got a list here. I'll touch on some of these. The big thing I wanted to have this as part of the slide deck that's available to you. And so I won't have to read verbatim on all of them, but in our industry, there are some guidelines that most schools in the country are supposed to follow, and we try to do our best to follow. And these are the kinds of things that schools should try as best they can to include on their aid offers. If you assume that your students are going to enroll full-time, you want to make sure they know that. That might be an appropriate assumption to make at a traditional four-year public or traditional four-year private. At a community college or a technical college, that might not be a good assumption to make because their students might not have a tendency to enroll full-time. So the school should share that with those students if they're making those kinds of assumptions. Should include both kinds of costs. I talked about direct and indirect, so schools are encouraged to include all of that info. Like I mentioned, it does lead to a little bit of confusion, and so you want to try to make sure students understand it. You want to share it with them, but try to do it in an understandable kind of way. And then some separation between those types of aid. Well, you'll see some examples of net price on the aid offers that we talk about. The goal there is to let the student know before any self-help aid, how much would it cost them to attend that institution? So you got the total cost and you subtract out grants and scholarships. So before the student has to borrow, how much would it cost? Some schools will try to include the estimated billing account balance. And so they can do that if they're able to predict that in a reasonable kind of way. Talked about some of the terminology we use, but there's a national effort to try to standardize some of that terminology, and that glossary of terms will help give definition to that terminology, and then look for some kind of next step guidance. So the student gets the aid offer, now what? And so hopefully schools are letting students know what they should do next. And then I got a couple of resources listed there if you have time and want to dig into why are these things recommended as a best practice. There's a couple of resources there for you to find more info about if you are so interested. Here I wanted to kind of mention a few things and give you a few examples that I've seen as an aid administrator as far as variance and how schools do what it is they do. On one extreme, a school may not package any student loans, and they might want the student to contact them, and they have a form or a loan request document that the student fills out. Maybe they're a very low-cost school, and they don't think that loans are as necessary for their students to attend, and so they just don't package student loans at all. And then on the other end of that spectrum, a school might package all of the loans that are available to a student because they want them to know the loans are available and the loans can be used to help pay for their educational expenses. Both very good reasons, both very good rationale for why they do what they do, but it creates variance. And as a high school student, you might have 5 aid offers, and it can cause them to look different from one another. Parent loans and private loans, I'll touch on those two kind of together. They go a little bit hand in hand. There's another national conversation happening about what kinds of, beyond the student loans, what kinds of loans make sense to share information on with families. And so you'll see some schools that will package, we call it packaging when we offer the loan. You'll see schools that package federal Parent Plus loans so that the family knows that's an available option. You'll see schools that provide a menu of options, and the federal Parent Plus loan might be included as that menu, in that menu of options, along with private or alternative loans, either for the student or the parent. So you see a combination of things there. And then sometimes schools will even include information about their tuition payment plans. If their billing office will let the student make monthly payments throughout the year on any balance due, you might see info about that on the aid offer as well. One document that might be of interest to you and to your students, it's going to be called the College Financing Plan. It's had that name for a year or two. Sometimes financial aid folks in our old habits, you might hear it called the shopping sheet. It used to be that, and that changed a couple years ago, but sometimes it's hard to remember. I'm sure we'll be talking about EFC several years after it changes, just out of habit. So this is kind of one of those things too. If a school signed the Veterans Administration Principles of Excellence, then they're required to provide this to students, certain groups of students. I say that because almost all schools in the country have signed that VA Principles of Excellence. If GI Bill benefits are available to their students, they sign this document. And that was a mechanism to require them to provide this college financing plan. But not 100% of schools in the country have to provide this. It's a standard form, very little ability for us to change it. I think we can put our school name on it. At one point we could put our school logo on it. I'm not even sure if we can do that now. But I say that just to kind of reinforce very little can change on this form. At Northwest, we're in that last bullet point. We're in that group that makes it available to our students. We don't push it to them like we do the aid offer. So they can access that form online in our self-service system anytime they want to. And a lot of schools are like that, and they don't push this out to students. So in that apples to apples comparison concept, if you have a school and you're not a big fan of that particular aid offer, the student can ask them for a copy of the college financing plan. And that might help if you've got one of those cases where you're just not a big fan of how they're presenting the financial aid info on the aid offer. So that can be kind of a backup plan for you. And then this last slide here gives you some examples. There are lots of what I'll call cost comparison worksheets. Some of them are fillable PDF documents. Some of them are interactive web forms. Some of them are printable, and you can fill them out paper and pen if you want to. So here's a few examples. UAspire is a company. They had an interactive web form. I tried to go through the process for that one, and I was required to sign up for a free account. I thought that's important for people to know if you're going to go use that one. Some people just don't like that. Some people are okay with it, but I thought it was worth including that as a heads up. NASFA, our National Professional Association, has a worksheet that's a PDF document. And since we're located in Missouri, I know not all of you are in Missouri, but our Missouri Department of Higher Education has a document that's a fillable PDF that's available. I would imagine other state Department of Higher Education groups have something similar, whether it's in Kansas or Illinois, or to the north or south of us in Arkansas or in Iowa. And then the College Board has a version too. And so you could look at those if you find a favorite and you think students might gravitate toward that particular version. There's lots of options out there. I just kind of highlighted 4 of them that I found. So I'll stop there and hand it back to either Teresa or the moderator, whichever.
All right. Well, thanks, Charles. And please continue to enter any questions in the chat or comments. And yes, next we have Teresa Steinkamp, Director of Advising at the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis. So we're going to turn it over to Teresa. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to try to get through this in about 10 minutes, mostly because I want us to have ample time for the breakout rooms. So at the Scholarship Foundation, our student advising team uses this idea of no sugarcoating, just the importance of being really honest with students and families about what their financial aid offers say and what the implications of those are, both immediately for the coming semester and academic year, as well as long-term over the course of their entire undergraduate experience and after they graduate when you think about loans and loan repayment. And so we have a lot of observations about financial aid offers, and I'm framing this in from a perspective of, for those of us who are working directly with students, here are some of the barriers that you may see students encounter, and these are some strategies to help them navigate those barriers. So I want to walk through the common barriers, and I want to acknowledge on the front end that there's a couple assumptions that are already built into this. So the first assumption is that a student is eligible to file a FAFSA and is going to receive a financial aid letter in the first place. So many of us work with students who may be ineligible to file a FAFSA and so may not be receiving a financial aid offer. And so we want to think about how to help those students understand the aid that could be available to them as well. And then this also isn't addressing any of the challenges that students may have leading up to receiving a financial aid letter, like verification or a dependency override, which Alexandria mentioned in her presentation about changes on the horizon. So these are the barriers that they may have once the financial aid offer is in hand or ready to be viewed. And so the first barrier that we see is accessing financial aid letters. And so we'll talk a little bit about some strategies for that. The second barrier is comprehending jargon and terms and being able to compare those across financial aid offers. The third is comparing the math. So I think this is especially important with regard to something that Buddy pointed out with, cost of attendance versus direct costs, because we do see financial aid offers that do not include the indirect cost information on that package. We see a barrier for students understanding both the impact and the implications of federal work study. What is it really, and what happens if they're not able to secure a work study position? Decision-making regarding loans. There's a lot of information that students don't know about loans, or just, making this big decision at a young point in life. It's a huge decision. And then considering the long-term factors. All right. So when it comes to accessing financial aid letters, I think there are two big things that we can really do to help students. So the first is, as students are accepted to colleges, one of the recommendations that we really make to them is to create those access points as they are invited to do so for the college email accounts and the school portal. We are increasingly seeing colleges, especially I think in the midst of this pandemic, sending a lot of critical communications to students through those systems. And so we want students to recognize that they may be receiving communications from their prospective schools and to check those systems regularly. So regularly may be once a week or every other week, but the importance of having them create those access points and check them so that they're not missing communication from the institution. And then I think it's important to also help students make follow-up calls to financial aid offices. So in the event that they haven't received a financial aid letter and they're trying to understand the potential timing of it, helping them make those calls. And I think it's important to have the student be the one making those communications. And there are lots of reasons for that. One reason from our standpoint at the Scholarship Foundation is, certainly that this is their education, and hopefully in the fall, they're going to be on a college campus and they need to understand how to go in and advocate for themselves. And so it might be that we need to role play with them, help them understand what questions they need to ask of the financial aid person. And potentially we need to be there with them while they're making the call, but they're going to be the one taking the lead in those conversations. Next slide, please. When it comes to comprehending the language, and this is so important, really helping to define the terms and explain them. So a good example of this, I think, would be subsidized versus unsubsidized. What do those terms mean? Sometimes financial aid offers will say sub and unsub. And so if I'm a student, it's not a foregone conclusion that if I have two financial aid letters, I'm going to connect one offer that says subsidized to another that says sub. And so helping to understand that there might be abbreviations and to clarify those terms and conditions so that students and families can really compare and understand the language that's being used. And so I think that's that second piece too about inconsistent language. I know that what I understand about financial aid offices is that they may use different technology and programs to create those documents. And so sometimes there's less character space. And so that might be a reason for an abbreviation. But from a student perspective, if they are comparing multiple documents, we need to help them see where the language aligns, even if the actual language being used is a little bit different. Next slide, please. All right, so the comparing math is maybe a little bit more time intensive, and I know that it makes a lot of us uncomfortable to really sit down and help students do the math on it, but I think it's really important, and it's great that Buddy provided the resources on how to really help students plug in some of the information to do the math. So it's important to not just compare costs, but I think from a student and a family perspective, especially right now, they really want to understand, how much do I need to borrow? What has the school offered me in student loans, whether that's loans only in the student's name, or is there a parent loan that's been packaged in? Is there the opportunity to borrow an alternative loan? And I know, both Melissa and I represent organizations that offer interest-free loans to students, and there's some differences between the interest-free loan at Missouri Scholarship and Loan Foundation and the one at the Scholarship Foundation. But those are additional resources that students can be considering, and how do those factor into a conversation? And I think it's also really critical for students to understand, is there a gap after loans have been taken into consideration? So a student might say, yes, I'm willing to borrow the $5,500 in Stafford loans that's been offered to me, but if there's an additional gap of $10,000 or $15,000, are they prepared to try to finance an additional amount beyond that $5,500? And if not, what are their options, and are there other schools that perhaps have less borrowing that the student would be responsible for? All right, so I think it's also really critical for students to understand the impact and implications of federal work study, and there's a lot that goes into this. So I think the first thing is that it's important to make sure that students understand that the funds are not necessarily guaranteed. So an award on a financial aid offer that includes federal work study doesn't mean that money will automatically be applied to the student's account. The student does have to find the work study position on campus, and then they have to earn those funds. And so I think it's critical for them to understand that. I think it's also important to understand that if they are really expecting to use federal work study to pay a bill to the school, that it's likely going to require diligence on their end to make those payments. I was lucky enough to benefit from work study when I was in college, and I can tell you there's no way I would have been able to use those paychecks to pay my bill to my college, because I was using it to pay for rent and groceries and other expenses that I had as a student. So not only making sure that the student understands that the funds are not guaranteed, but how they're going to be able to use those funds, and whether or not that's going to fit with the needs that they have for their cost and their expenses. With regard to finding work study jobs, I think some colleges also have their own deadlines. Because work study is a campus-based program, not all schools have like large budgets, and they're trying to get as many interested students a work study position and a work study award as is feasible. So I have really gotten into the practice of encouraging students to ask their college, is there a deadline to accept my work study award? Is there a deadline to find a job? And what happens if I decide that I want to take the first semester or the first year of college not to work because I want to acclimate to college campus as a new college student? Can I participate in federal work study in a future semester or year if I don't participate immediately? When it comes to decision making with loans, I think there's some key things. So we want, of course, students to understand the terms and conditions of the loans, interest rates, grace period, a high level repayment understanding, because of course that is likely to change over the next few years. And so being too far into the weeds is probably not going to be helpful. One way that I have found can be useful to help students do this is to sit through entrance counseling with them. I think there's an inclination to kind of just go through the entrance counseling quickly for a lot of students because it's something that they need to check off their to-do list, but there's a lot of really important information and detail there. I also believe it's important for students to know their rights. And so at the Scholarship Foundation, we ask that students who borrow from our interest-free loan program not borrow federally. And when we circle back with students in subsequent years to ask them about their borrowing decisions, one of the things that I sometimes hear is, well, I didn't realize I could turn down the federal loan that was offered to me, or I didn't realize I could turn down a partial amount. So helping students realize that if they're in that really, great position of not needing to borrow all of the student loans that have been offered to them, that they can reject a portion of a loan, or that they can decline the loans outright if that's something that they wish not to do. And then I think it's also important to engage in some tough love. Most of us, maybe all of us, understand what it's like to have a loan that we're in repayment on, whether it's a student loan or some other kind of debt. And so helping students really understand the implications of that and what it means for their ability to do other things that they may wish to do for themselves down the road. And I think it's especially important to engage in some tough love around conversations with students who have the expectation that they will need to borrow student loans to go to their institution and still have a gap. I know many of you have probably worked with a student who at some point has found themselves with a back balance, and the difficulties of paying for a back balance is very challenging for many students. As they consider long-term factors, so make sure that they understand all of the eligibility criteria for future years. So is their funding renewable? Are they going to be able to meet that eligibility criteria in the future, and understand what happens if they lose some of their financial aid? And reviewing their financial aid package to ensure that they're not front-loaded with financial aid that is only available to them for their first year, because again, as I imagine many of you are aware, it becomes difficult for students to replace those dollars as they matriculate through college. And then it's important for us to stress renewing the FAFSA each year for students who are eligible to file a FAFSA. So again, remembering that there are students who we work with who may not be eligible to file a FAFSA each year, and helping them navigate the processes to get the aid that they need. All right, so these are just some direct questions for students to ask their financial aid office. So what are the college's processes and procedures and deadlines related to work study? Do they have a place where they post work study positions? What is the college's policy on financial aid adjustments? So if the student earns an outside scholarship, how will that impact the financial aid package that the institution has already offered to the student? Again, understanding deadlines, processes, and requirements for renewing their financial aid. What are they expected to do next? And if there's a gap at their institution, how are they supposed to fill that gap? What are some of the strategies or suggestions that the college has? And then, so why do we think it's important not to sugarcoat? So we are asking young people, and I know that probably all of us have seen the, some of the headlines and the data right now about how a lot of students are unsure about going to college moving forward. But even pre-pandemic, we were asking students to take a significant leap of faith and invest in themselves as one of the biggest financial investments in their lifetime potentially. And so I think we have a responsibility to be direct with them, to be honest and transparent, ultimately making sure that they have all of the information available to make an informed decision for themselves, whatever that decision may be. And then I think that's about it. So I don't know if there are any questions in the chat. Otherwise, we can hand it back over to you, Melissa.
Okay, perfect. All right, so thank you, Teresa. That was great information. So next we're going to go into the breakout rooms with the financial aid expert. They'll walk through some financial aid offers and compare them, maybe talk about their own first. So these are really smaller groups, so you can ask questions, make reflections on what students may have questions about. So we're going to have one person from each group, if possible, just to come back to this when the session's over to report nothing major, just one reflection or something that you've learned. And then, so Caitlin is going to start putting us into those groups now. And welcome back, everybody. That was awesome. And it went so fast. We were out of time quickly. It seems like it's going to be a long time to be in a breakout, and then it goes so quick. Wanted to see if we could just maybe one person from each. We're going to do this very quick because we want to end on time, actually early today. So maybe one person in each group, if you could just, any reflection or something that you learned, if you could just jump in real quick. I can call out groups, maybe from Chris's group, someone?
Melissa, do you want the group leader to do that or one of the attendees?
Anybody.
Okay.
We can have the group leader. Sure. We'll put the group leader on the spot. Chris.
Awesome. Yeah, so something that I always find when going through these is how similar all the award letters are, but then there's just one key difference that's going to throw somebody off and could throw everybody's calculation of what that cost to get to us or cost to attend a school is, and how that one like little difference can change someone's cost to attend a school from $0 to $7,000 if you're doing that calculation correctly. So they're all very similar, but that one little thing can change everything.
Awesome, thank you. James from Harris Stowe.
Yeah, so we went through that award letter. Not a lot of questions about the award letter, a couple questions about loans, but we started talking more about professional judgments and some of the issues that some grandparents, or if the parents out of the picture, kind of what some of the policies and procedures that schools have around that. And I think it was a pretty good conversation.
Awesome, thanks, James.
You're welcome.
And Kayla.
So we talked about the award letters, but I think our biggest takeaway that we kind of talked about was not only changes, but how much as financial aid personnel, we are really here to help you guys. Like I told my group, if they have questions or you don't know the answer, and especially those students that don't have the help at home, and you guys are really the ones helping them through this process, we would be more than happy for you all to sit in on the meetings with them, understand what the questions they're asking. I tell people all the time, yes, I work at Mizzou, but I can pretty much answer any question about financial aid that you have, or I know somebody at the school and can get you to them. And so that's our big thing. Like, we're here to help you guys. MASFAP is a wide range of financial aid personnel across the state of Missouri. And if we don't know the answer, we will get you to the school to get that answer. So definitely use us as a resource.
All right, thank you. Buddy, reflections from your group.
We did a high level scan through the aid offers and checked for takeaways. I pulled up one of those college cost worksheets, and I kind of shared that maybe the goal could be, how much of this worksheet can you fill out? And if you've got sections that are blank, then there's some things missing and you need to follow back up with the school. And then we talked a little bit about the term that I call it displacement. That gets used a lot, but when a student gets a private scholarship, is that going to have an impact on other aid offered? So we talked a little bit about that. And then the Missouri State A+ program got mentioned. And so we answered a question about that and how that works and why not all students end up with an A+ scholarship, sort of the first payer versus last payer concepts in financial aid. If something will pay tuition first, or is something only going to pay tuition if it's not paid by something else? So if the Pell Grant has to apply first before the tuition gets paid, or can that, which one goes in front, which one goes in the back kind of thing. So we talked a little bit about that. And then, like you said, time flew by and we were back here really quick.
Awesome, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, so just echoing, what Kayla said, I had asked my group, had they ever had a gap counseling night or where they brought in, administrators in from outside. I work at Stevens College, but I always am wearing my financial aid administrator hat. And so usually when it comes to MASFAP, I usually take my Stevens hat off and I'm coming in just as an expert to help your students, no matter if they come to my school or go to even one of my competitors. So just kind of looking at them, we didn't go through all the award letters or offer letters, sorry. But I think, seeing the differences, making sure students are comparing apples to apples. We talk a lot about that and just, helping those students through that. And we're always here.
Awesome. Thank you. Dave?
I would echo all of those same things. It's interesting for those of you guys out on the road doing the financial aid nights. I feel like I'm on speed dial with many schools. And when we're finished here, I have a meeting with a high school student who's trying to figure out how to fill out the FAFSA. I think that things we talked about. I was trying to help families slow the award letter down. Financial aid is just 4 things. I mean, it's grants, scholarships, loans, and work, and helping them understand those pieces on an award letter. We talked a little bit about what is, those of you that know me, what does it take to pay for a degree and how's that happen? And understanding student loans when they're in repayment. If we say a student's going to borrow $30,000 to go to get a degree, that's a big number. What does it mean? And we broke that down in monthly payment numbers that are hopefully easy to understand. So went quick.
Thank you. And Teresa.
Yeah, so just 2 things that are a little bit different maybe from some other things that folks have already shared, which are all great. One would be that we noticed that one of the financial aid letters indicated something about the student had been selected for verification, and just a reminder that that was an estimate. And so we had a conversation about where a student might find the documentation that's been requested of them for verification and how they would go about understanding that and following up. And then the second thing that we talked about that I think is worth mentioning here is just that there's a lot of variance across schools in the estimates for some of the indirect costs. So for example, there were some pretty big differences across personal expenses across some of the financial aid offers. So helping students and families understand the implications of that, and then how to budget so that you stay within something that is realistic for you based on your financial circumstances.
Awesome, thank you. And I was in Courtney's group, and her internet is a little unstable, so I said I would just talk. We also noticed the variances, saw some things that could be really confusing for students if they got this, the same award letters. And then we also noted, Ellen was in my session, and we noted as scholarship providers that really over the last 5 years, we have actually seen some really great changes to award letters in the state that are make it a little less confusing. So we definitely see, I think, kind of getting these award letters out there. Schools are definitely making improvements and like to see other examples and things. So I will keep moving. As far as some announcements and resources, that slide deck is in the chat. So here's some resources for you and your students. The next slide is our contact information. And anyone on this list is happy to answer questions. As you heard, as some of the financial aid people were talking, everyone is, we're all in this together to get that student high school to college. So thank you to the school counselors. You're amazing. Have a great weekend. Remember to take care of yourself too. It was great to spend this time with you. And I have to add, go Chiefs. Support the whole state here. So thank you all. Have a great weekend.